What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. In this episode I'm finally going to be installing all of the solar equipment, and I'll go step by step so you can follow along and copy this exact setup. Stay tuned, I'll show you how it's done. This would be pretty easy if I was just connecting all the solar, but what I'm trying to do is build an integrated cabinet for the solar, which is also going to support the bed. So it's a lot of measurements and things, so I'm just working things out. I know I need 32 inches of clearance under the bed here, and I just want to work out where I'm going to put everything. Alright, I've got this all insulated in here, and I've just got the last panel over there drying. Then I could put it in here. You can see I kind of recessed it back a bit. So I'm going to put the diesel heater right here, so that'll give me a little extra space. And I had to make this wide enough to fit the inverter. So I think this is 12 inches wide. One of my goals with this system is to make it look a lot neater. And for that I'm going to be using the Lynx power in, which is basically a positive and negative bus bar connected together. You may have heard of the Lynx power distributor, which is basically the same as the Lynx power in, except the Lynx power distributor will light up when the fuses go out. This has the space where the lights would be if it had that capabilities, but this one doesn't. It's basically just two bus bars, a positive and a negative. So since I'm not using Victron components for the rest of the system, where it would communicate and that would be helpful for me, I'm only using it as a bus bar. You can save, I think it's like $85 by just going with the Lynx power in. The only thing you need to modify to make this work with fuses is to take the cover off and add a few bolts. And I'll put a link for all of the bolts, nuts, and washers that I use for this. All of the hardware is stainless except for the lock washer, which is copper. Okay, so for this you're going to need 4 M8 1.25" 30mm bolts, 12 M8 washers, 8 M8 1.25" nuts, 4 M8 split lock washers. So I'm starting to lay things out now, and I've got the inverter here, the battery here. I think the fuse box will go here, and then we've got the charge controller and the Lynx power in, so those will go here and here. And making the first connection here, which is the output for the AC outlets that are around the van here. And I'm making this one first because this is the shortest cable here, so I want to get this connected. That way I know exactly where this needs to go before I screw it down, so I still can move this around. And then we've got the connections for the positive for the battery and the negative for the battery. So according to the instructions, the battery temperature sensor here, connect the temperature sensor for all batteries except lithium. So since we're using lithium, we won't be connecting this, so I'll set this aside. Okay, so I also got the remote control connected into the connection here on the left, and then into the back of the remote control sensor. That's just temporarily set up. So I decided on putting the Lynx power in right here. And that's going to be perfect because I won't have to extend the negative coming from the van's battery, which is going to be for the alternator charging and also the ground. So that should connect right there. It just takes 4 screws to connect it to the wall. I also added a 250 amp terminal fuse to the battery here. I kind of keep rearranging things, so now I think I'm going to put the charge controller here. Then we'll put the fuse box here. Switch the battery so the terminals are on that end, so I can go through this on-off switch here. Negative will come this way over here and go through the shunt, which will measure the power going in and out for the battery monitor. And I went ahead and added this 80 amp breaker. This is coming from the positive going all the way up front to the van's battery. It's going to go through the 80 amp breaker, come out here, right into the charge controller for the alternator charging. So I'm just trying to get as much as I can connected before I put things in their final location, because sometimes the wires don't want to make certain bends, and it's helpful if you don't have this fastened down yet until you have most of the wires connected to it. Then at that point you can put it right where it needs to go, screw it down. This wire is not connected in the front yet. Also, the breaker's off, so everything's in the off position here. One of the last things I'll do is connect the battery to the bus bars. So everything I'm working on doesn't have power on at the moment. So now I just need to extend this 4-gauge wire from the breaker here to the charge controller where it says alt. That's for the alternator charging, positive. So just kind of measure the length I need, and then I can snip it right here. And then we'll add 2 lugs to the end of this. So now to add the terminal, we just cut back some of the wire insulation. Kind of mark with your finger. Slowly cut away the rubber. And just make sure not to cut through the copper. You can kind of feel it if you go carefully. Once you get it about 90% of the way, you can just grab it and twist it off. Like that. Now you can put the terminal lug on. Test this, you should not be able to pull this at all. That's a pretty good crimp there. And then you can just slide the rubber protector over it, and then you just melt this with a lighter, and that's like a shrink wrap around it. So that's what that looks like when the shrink wrap's on. And then the other thing you want to check is which orientation you want your next lug on. After you put the first one on, bring it back over to the connection and just see where this needs to go, because you don't want to put the next lug on like this and then you have to twist the wire all up to connect it. So I know it needs to be just like that, so that's how I'll connect the second lug. I also plugged in the battery temperature sensor. Just plugs right in there. And then eventually this will get zip tied to either the positive or negative cable coming from the battery. That just can sense the temperature so it knows what to do if things get hot or cold. 2 more connections to this. The solar PV, photovoltaic. So the solar positive will connect here. The solar negative will connect here, and then I also need to connect this to the battery via the bus bar. So I'll have a positive coming out here through a fuse. I have a 70 amp fuse I'll attach here and connect that to the positive side. The negative side will connect under here to the negative bus bar. correction, the charge controller is actually going to get an 80 amp fuse. And before I do that, the next thing I actually want to do is connect the inverter to the bus bars. And for that I'm going to be using 2/0 cable. These wires here are 4 gauge. As you get lower in number, the wire becomes larger, thicker. So a 3 gauge will be larger than this, a 2 gauge is larger, and so on. Once you get past 0, you have a 1/0 and then a 2/0. This is a 2/0, really thick wire. And you can see how it's listed 2/0 gauge. So don't confuse 2/0 with 2 gauge wire. This is much thicker. So this is what you want to use to connect the battery to the bus bar and also the inverter to the bus bar. Because those are the two things that will be using large amounts of power, so they need the larger wire. For the charge controller and the DC fuse panel that's going to go over there, you can use the 4 gauge wire. So before I close this back up, you can see down in there, that little nut, we're going to add this ground wire. And I've just made a long length so I could snip it later for the length I need. Alright, so I've got the negative connected behind here. These things just flip up so you can access the negative bus bar. So for the inverter, that one's connected. And then we're going to use a 200 amp fuse here. Again, I'll have links for everything in the description. These are hard to find, not hard to find, but there are many different sizes. You need AMG, that's the size here. That's a 200 amp fuse. That's going to go over the positive like so. Then we'll put washer, block nut, and then the nut. Washer, block nut, nut. So the last connection I need to make on the inverter is the AC power in, which goes over here. And originally I was going to connect another plug to this and then cut the other plug so I can strip the wires and connect it to these 3. But I was thinking I could actually just cut this right here and try and strip it back and connect this directly to the terminals here. So hopefully this works out, because otherwise not sure I'm going to be able to replace this. We'll find out here in a sec. Alright, luckily that worked very nicely. You can see I just snipped it and stripped it back. So now I'm just going to make these 3 connections here, run it through this thing here. These wires are all going to be out of the way here. I just moving things around so I can connect everything. Alright, everything in here is connected in the inverter. So now I can put the cover back on and then put all the screws back in. And then once the screws are in, I can finally screw this thing down in place here. So next I'm going to connect the solar. Now that the sun has gone down, it's a good time to do this. Otherwise you can put a big blanket over the solar panels. You don't want to be working on this when there's power going through it. But the first connection I'm going to make is going to be to a shut-off switch. So here's a shut-off switch, and so you can pull these plastic pieces out on any of the 4 sides. So I'm going to have the solar wire here come in the bottom, and then it's going to come out the side here and then run this way, connecting to the charge controller. The charge controller includes the terminals to connect to the solar cables. So I'm going to crimp these on the end here. I'm going to cut this right here, attach it to the shut-off switch, and then run it over to here. The charge controller terminals that came with it, they actually don't fit on the shut-off switch. But I have this kit, and I'll put a link for it. It has all different terminal sizes, so I have one in here that will fit on there. And then this should still fit on top of the charge controller terminal. but I need to use a different one for the on-off switch here. So the negative line going to the bus bar is right here, and this is the negative line for the solar panel. You need to connect both of these to this terminal here, but after this one's on, you won't be able to, you could still connect this, but you won't be able to put the cover back on if you do it that way. So what I do is I connect it out the side here, like that, and then with the cover only has the holes in the top there. So I'll just take the Dremel and notch out a little opening here. Okay, you can see I just connected the fuse panel. Got the positive coming around here, 125 amp fuse, and the negatives running below here, coming up here. This cover comes off, and then I'll make the DC connections eventually. That's what all these wires are, so they'll all get neatly routed around here. Going to grab a few clips and start to neaten the wires. So I've just cut 3 of these aluminum L bracket things that I had left over from the roof racks. This is how I'm going to mount the battery. So I've marked where I need to put them, like so. And then I took my countersink bit and drilled the hole, so now I can just screw these down, and the battery should be held securely in place like that. Alright, the positive line of the battery is connected, and I have the switch turned off obviously, so it's not completely connected. I haven't tightened this one down yet because I might want to move this up or down, so I haven't screwed this into the wall yet based on where I'm going to run the negative wire. It might be easier to run the negative wire under here to over here, but in between the negative wire and the bus bar is where I connect the shunt. It's what's going to make the battery monitor work, which will get mounted up there. And I have the wire that's being ran through the wall for the battery monitor right here. So now I can run this wire back through here. It plugs in right here to the shunt, and then there's a second wire, this one here, that gets connected into one of the terminals here, and then this gets connected to the battery positive. So after I connect the negative, I can flip the switch and we should have power. I'll probably just make one DC connection before I flip that switch. I think I'll connect like the fan, so that way when I turn the power on I'll know everything's working if the fan's working. So here's our shunt. This is going to connect like that. This one will connect here, and then I'll just run the positive cable, connect it over here, and then we'll plug the battery monitor in. Should be good to go after that. So what's nice is I was able to use the shunt to kind of make this right turn, so it's going to connect like this, so it'll be less bending in the wire. Alright, literally everything's connected except for the DC wires. So I'm just going to connect this one wire for the rear fan to the fuse panel before I flip the switch. I even got the battery monitor plugged in there. I haven't mounted it yet, but that has power. So to connect the DC wires, it's super easy. Separate the positive and negative with crimp on one of these terminal ends here. Positive will connect up here, and then a fuse will be put in here, and the negative will connect down here. Connect to any of the negatives, any of the positives. I've got this little kit here, all the different connections. And again, I'll have a link for everything I use here in the description down below. Make it easy for you if you just want to copy this whole setup. Okay, so that's how that's connected. And then I'm going to put a 10 amp fuse in there, just like that. And I have this fuse kit, I'll link as well, all different size fuses. put the cover back on this. I believe we are ready to flip this switch. It should give us power. So now we need to change the battery from green to blue. So you push this button on the side here. One push made it yellow, another push made it blue, and that's going to indicate lithium. So I finally made my connection of the positive here and the negative here. This will be for the alternator charging. And a lot of you may be wondering how I'm grounding the system. And as you can see here, the vehicle battery is grounded right here to the van. And this is going to come all the way back to my negative on the bus bar, and that's going to ground the whole system. So I can put the cover back on this, and when I flip the breaker, we should have alternator charging. Man, so I ran into a problem, and it took me a really long time to figure it out. I was going through everything trying to figure it out. But as soon as I flip on the solar panels, everything would stop working again. And I was going through everything trying to figure it out. And finally, I realized that the charge controller here, the maximum input voltage to the charge controller can be 25 volts. And because I wired my solar panels, the 4 solar panels, in series parallel, I think I'm bringing in 36 volts. 18 plus 18. So the charge controller is not allowing the solar to charge because of the voltage. So what I need to do is go up onto the roof and swap out the series parallel for parallel, which will keep the voltage down to 18. And I'll just need to use 2 of these branch connectors, the 4-to-1, and swap it all out, and I'm pretty sure that's going to make everything work. So everything else is working. The lights are on, as you can see. Fans are working. Everything's connected. I just need to rewire the solar panels up there, and hopefully that solves the issue. So I'll let you know as soon as I do that. All right, guys, I fixed it. Pretty happy. So I will say the Loctite on the screws up on the roof, they work. It was very difficult to take them off, but I was able to kind of lift it up a little bit, change the wiring, so now it's in parallel. And when I flip the solar switch here, we should be charging with solar. It's raining out right now, so it's probably just going to be like a little bit of a trickle, but I'll show you what we got so far. So right now the switch is off for the solar. We have no solar, and because I have the lights on, we're using 0.9 amps. You can see the negative means we're losing power. I flip this switch here. It'll just take a minute. Usually takes like 15-20 seconds or so. That light will start blinking. There it goes. It's just starting to feel it. There it is. So now you see this is lit. We are charging with solar. Come over here. Like I said, it's raining out right now, so we're not getting very much, but 11 amps we're charging. There we go. So that's a relief. Everything's working now. You can see the lights are on behind me. The fan, everything's working. And I also set up the DC outlets with USB and USB-C. Got one here, another one here, and one over here. I'll put a link for the outlet I used. I found this outlet plate on Amazon. It's just a decor style hole here, and this was blank, so I had to drill an 1.25 inch hole here, I think it was, or maybe it was an inch, whatever it was. I had to drill out the hole so this could go through, and I think that looks really clean. Got the controller for the heater mounted, but that's not installed yet. Yeah, so now the battery is already fully charged, 14.4 volts. It's already stopped charging. Oh, this is great. Okay, so let me give you kind of rundown of the system here. I've got the SOC 206 amp hour battery, and we're going through a 250 amp fuse. I like this terminal fuse here, it's very convenient. Positives coming through to an on-off switch, and then going to our positive bus bar, negative bus bars down here. The negatives coming through, going through the shunt, which operates the battery monitor up there. And the shunt also has a little positive lead here, just to power the screen that connects right here. And from the bus bar, that's where we have all our fuses. Let me take the panel off actually so I can show you. So I really like this Lynx power in. I had to buy the hardware here to turn it into a fuse holder, but this has really made everything look a lot neater. So here we have the positive going to the DC fuse panel. This just runs over here, and that's going through a 125 amp fuse. And the negative just connects right below it, and that's running over to the fuse panel. Here's the positive coming to the charge controller with an 80 amp fuse here, and negative coming to the charge controller. Here we have a 200 amp fuse going to the inverter charger. So the positive comes in here, the negative right there. So those are the three main components. And then we've got the two solar cables coming in. This is the negative. I connected it through the side here. You could also connect it to the negative bus bar, by the way. You don't have to cut the little notch there and connect it there, but I don't know, I've always done it that way. The positive solar wires coming here, and then we've got the alternator charging here. This is coming from the van's battery up front. This is the negative, which is also connected to the chassis up front, so that grounds the whole system since it's connected to here. And the positive for the coming from the van's battery up front, going through an 80 amp breaker here, and coming into where the alternator connects. And the only other thing I have is this plug for the shore power. So this is coming in here. I have a plug on the outside of the van, so you can plug in just a normal extension cord, and that really charges the batteries fast. I actually have to kind of adjust the settings on this. I think it's giving maybe too much power. And then all the AC outlets are connected to this Romex cable, which is just spliced and connected inside the inverter there. And I'll show you on the outside of the van the plug. So here's the shore power plug. So it's really clean looking. Just kind of looks like maybe a fuel fill or something. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I made some changes on this system. It's a little different than what I usually do. I added this bus bar Lynx power in that really neatened everything up. I added the shore power charging, and I went with this new battery, which I'm still not decided if I like it yet, but I'm gonna see how it works now that I have the solar working and everything. I'll give it a few weeks and then I'll let you guys know what I think of this. And it's kind of a compact footprint, which is nice. It's also a marine battery, so it's weatherproof. Alright guys, thanks a lot for watching. That's going to do it for this episode. If you have any questions, just leave a comment down below and I'll be sure to answer that for you. Everything you see here, I have an Amazon link in the description. If I'm missing anything, just let me know and I'll add that link. So if you want to copy this exact system, it should be pretty easy to do. And I'll see you guys next time. There's a lot more to come in this build, so please hit the like and subscribe button. And I'll see you guys next time. Later.